Lia Thomas's performance in NCAA women's swimming has raised questions about trans women in sport once again. And once again, Matt Walsh has ramped up the rhetoric, calling out unfair, claiming that the wrong person has won the race, in any races that Lia has won. But to look at sports as just being about winning is to take a very narrow view of sports. It's very like taking Dolores Umbridge's view on education.
It is the view of the ministry that a theoretical knowledge will be sufficient to get you through your examinations, which, after all, is what school is all about.
She says that education is about passing exams, a very narrow point of view that misses the point entirely. While we measure education by exams and give awards to students that do the best on the exams to encourage them to study hard and do their best, no reasonable educator thinks that passing exams is the point of education. And the same can be said of sports. Winning a sport feels good. It is a reward for putting in the work and effort to arrive at that point. We give awards to individuals and teams that win at sports to encourage hard work and team and individual effort. But just as exams are not the goal of education, winning is not the end goal of sports. Despite UCLA Bruins football coach Henry Russell Sanders' claim that winning isn't everything, it's the only thing. The real goals and benefits of sports are not winning. Sports is about inclusion, it's about teamwork, it's about striving to excel at a particular thing. It's about hard work and effort and setting and reaching goals. Winning is great, but it isn't the point. Sports is about inclusion. When women were excluded from sports entirely, they found other ways for social interaction and group inclusion. And as you will see in the upcoming interview, when women joined into men's sports, it wasn't women clamoring for their own competition categories so that they could win. It was men who didn't want women competing against them. They wanted them out, and thus the birth of women's sports. Women's sports gave women a new opportunity to compete and to belong. Various groups have been excluded from sports based on race and physical or mental disability, as well as gender. To really win at sports, all must be included. If there are issues with a level playing field, we need to address those issues, not exclude trans women from sports. I have asked Phoebe Rose to help me address Matt Walsh's rant on this subject. Watch as we react together. Let's have a chat. So thank you, Phoebe, for coming and joining me to help me out with this very difficult issue.
I think we'll go with the words thorny.
Okay, thorny issue. Yes, I think it is a thorny issue. So let's start out by bringing up Matt Walsh and see what some of his comments are. Yeah, I know. It doesn't get much worse than Matt Walsh, does
Ken
it?
Ham.
Yeah, that's true. Ken Ham is pretty bad. But hey, did you know that Ken Ham might be getting ready to retire?
I didn't realize that Grift gave you a pension.
I don't know if there's a pension involved or not, but he certainly has begged, borrowed, and stolen enough to be able to make it through for the rest of his time on this planet.
He does remind me very much of one of those mega pastors that, with seed money, shall we say.
I'm going to bring in Matt Walsh to talk about Lia Thomas and the NCAA swimming championship.
They can see the cultural tide turning slightly, and they're terrified. Speaking of which, the Lia Thomas charade at the NCAA Women's Swimming Championships last week has become its own sort of watershed moment, no pun intended. There's a backlash against the trans agenda right now, unlike anything we've seen to this point in our culture.
Yes, you have something.
Not a charade. There is no trans agenda, and Lia Thomas is a she.
Yes, I know. He will misgender Lia.
But the first time I hear it, I have to make clear that Matt Walsh is a misgendering bigot.
Yes. There is no question about that. Good. I was wondering if maybe we should just misgender Matt for the rest of the video. But
Now, should we just use they?
there we go. There we go.
They just use
We can
they
use
throughout the they, not he, not she, not it, not them. They, just they. Well, them is a form of they, but there you go. Just they. Matt Walsh is now they. They pronouns for the rest of the show.
Okay. All right. Let's see what Matt has to say about Lia.
And it hasn't abated, even after Thomas lost his final races over the weekend, clearly in the competition intentionally so that the gender ideologues could point to it and say, see, it's not so unfair after all.
And this is absolutely, the misogyny of Matt Walsh.
Not only is it misogyny of Matt Walsh, it is white knighting, which is even worse. Here he is.
Okay.
He's on his steed in his shining armor, as shiny as my blouse is. The reason I wore that blouse, this blouse, was because it's going to be shiny as Matt Walsh's. But he's probably not given a flying monkeys about NCAA swimming a day in his life before he heard about Lia Thomas. Probably never even knew it existed. We may have gone, oh, there's NCAA swimming, but probably never even knew who the champion was. Probably never even knew where it took place. The only reason he's interested is so that because it furthers his bottom line. He's got no interest in preserving women's sport. He's got no interest in the fairness of NCAA swimming. He's got no interest in the fairness of anything to do with sports whatsoever. It's just his grift.
The other thing that I find interesting is that he thinks that Lia intentionally threw some races just to prove that Lia wasn't going to dominate in every race.
Okay. So Matt Walsh is accusing somebody of cheating.
Yes.
Race fixing.
Yes.
Where there are bets that are placed on these events in Vegas. I could walk into a Vegas bookmaker and I could place a bet on the NCAA. Quite legitimately. So Matt Walsh is saying that Lia Thomas is race fixing. And therefore is engaged in some form of scandal that means that betting itself is not fair in any way, shape, or form. Don't think that's going to last, because all the great scandals, the point shaving scandal from the 1990s and other NCAA scandals that have been like that, you haven't noticed what's going on. This is a bit obvious. It's a little bit on the obvious side. You wouldn't do it. It's too obvious. And no, I have seen no evidence that Lia Thomas is in any way race fixing or throwing races or has in any way done anything apart from put 100% into training and 100% into these races and has simply come out in the position that she's come out in.
Well, in addition to that, one of the things that I saw was that the race where Lia came in fifth, Lia was 0.8 of a second off of her best time. And 0.8 of a second is hardly throwing a race.
Not like you're driving a car here. It's not like motor racing where 0.8 of a second is a lot. We're talking about 0.8 of a second here in an event where 0.8 of a second equates to about 4 yards.
Right.
We're not talking much here. We're talking 4 yards, or for those of us in the real world, little over 3 meters here. The NCAA use backwards measurements and they use yards. So it's the 50 yards, the 100 yards, the 500 yards. Whereas the Olympic is the 50, the 100, the 200, the 500 meters, like sensible parts of the world. But that's a rant for another day. But 0.8 of a second is not much. 0.8 of a second is potentially the difference between getting your stroke right and getting your stroke wrong. You get your stroke right, you hit the end perfectly. Wonderful. You get your stroke wrong and you're off stroke and you're leaning for it. Whereas if you're in your... It just doesn't make sense. It makes no sense whatsoever.
I mean, he won handily in this, what was a 500-meter race, and then the couple of races he did on Saturday, he lost. He came in 6th place or something. Wasn't even competitive. So pretty clear that he lost on purpose.
Yeah, that's what I was talking about. They go into a little bit more depth there.
Yes,
saying
they do.
claiming that Leah, I'm wondering if he's also accused Leah of a federal crime. I am not.
NCAA takes Title IX money, right?
I believe so.
So that's Department of
So
Education money, right?
throwing a race could possibly be a federal
That's
crime.
that's a federal crime that they are accusing her of. It's going to be interesting to see how you back up your defamation, Matt.
But that has done little to stem the tide of outrage, nor should it. On Sunday, an NCAA swimmer by the name of Rika Georgi wrote a letter to the NCAA protesting their decision to let a male compete. Now, she's the first female swimmer to formally and publicly complain with her name attached. Bold move, brave move, necessary move.
Self-absorbed, narcissistic, sore loser.
And I admire her for it. Now, on the other hand, I don't think it's splitting hairs to point out that when I read this letter, she refers to Lia Thomas as she multiple times. And also talks about how much she respects Lia Thomas and all those things. And Lia Thomas is pursuing his dreams, or rather her dreams, and so on and so forth. Now, this doesn't totally negate the impact of the letter, but it does diminish it slightly, sadly.
Well, it's not bigoted enough for you. It's not transphobic enough for you. It's not
Right.
hateful enough for you. It doesn't fit your agenda perfectly. It's not, I hate Lia Thomas and trans people don't have the right to exist. How dare this person correctly gender them in their letter where they're being a self-absorbed, narcissistic, sore loser? How dare they not be as bigoted as I am? How dare they correctly gender Lia Thomas? How dare they? How dare they?
The one point that I would agree with Matt on is that if you recognize Leah as being a woman, then you have no grounds on which to ban her from women's sports.
I'm going to stop you there.
Okay.
If you recognize Leah as a woman, you have no grounds to ban her just for existing from women's sports. You do, though, however, have to undergo the protocols that ensure that the rules on hormone-affirming treatment are followed. And as far as I'm aware, and I have seen no evidence to the contrary, Lia Thomas has broken a grand total of 0 NCAA rules.
You are correct on that. That is one of the things that I was looking up. And Leah competed with the men's team in Leah's freshman year. And after her freshman year, she realized she wanted to transition, and she let her coaches know that that's what she wanted to do. And she went through over a year of HRT before competing on the women's team. And Leah discusses the transition that she went through and how she had to get used to swimming in a different body. She says she's now an inch shorter. She's lost a considerable amount of muscle mass and had to get used to how to adapt her stroke to her new body before she ever competed with the women's team.
And that is part of a legitimate debate on hormones and trans athletes in general. That's part of a legitimate debate. If Matt Walsh was going down the route of there are hormones that play here, we don't know about the long-term effects here, we don't know about what's going on with the hormones that Lia is using, the testosterone suppressors that Lia is using, we don't know what the effects they are having. That is part of a legitimate, scientifically driven debate. But that's not what's happening here. What's happening here is Matt Walsh is going, I don't want trans people to exist, and how dare they exist?
You're absolutely right. We'll let him continue spouting.
We'll
his
let him
ignorance.
rant on, shall we?
Yes.
Because by calling Thomas she, it concedes the underlying claim that Thomas is making. I mean, either Thomas is a she or not, and he's not. And since he's not, he doesn't belong in the women's league. But if he was a she, then there'd be no reason to complain.
We do have rules as to what constitutes a eligible athlete.
Yes.
And they are not just rules with regards to gender. There's other types of rules as well. You go into some sports and they have weight classes.
And on this point, I'd like to address head on one of the absurd claims that goes around the internet. And one of the absurd claims that is made by people that Matt Walsh associates with. That Matt Walsh could all of a sudden one day say that they are Martina Walsh and start competing in the female categories in whatever they liked. That is complete horse manure, an absolute tripe. And anybody that says, oh, but they were a man and now they're a woman and they've just said that so they can win, is an absolute 100% clot and should not have any legitimacy placed upon them and any legitimacy placed upon what they say in this discussion, because they are coming at it from a position of willful ignorance.
Yeah, tying into that, one of the things that I find appallingly misunderstood, Lia gets death threats. Lia is bombarded with hate mail and animosity.
Yeah.
There is no way that Lia joined the women's team because Lia wanted to win and could only do so as a woman.
And on this point,
okay,
the obsessive lengths that some of the UK anti-trans movement have gone to, simply to oppose a 22-year-old swimming, is absurd. There was a group, who I shall not name because I don't want to be sued, who flew from England to North America, a different continent, to stand outside the swimming pool with placards and then go inside the swimming pool and hurl abuse and start shouting during the races and started haranguing people who were taking part in supporting not just Lia Thomas, but just generally there. These people have never seen a swimming race before in their life. They're only there to simply make it as uncomfortable for trans people to exist and carry on a peaceful life as possible. These people, it is not them participating in any good faith. It is a transphobic obsession, and they don't just want to stop Lia Thomas from swimming. They want to stop me existing. They want to stop your child existing. And it is absolute nonsense that anybody gives any of these organizations or any of these individuals that have anything to do with going and protesting outside. I've got no problem with you protesting, but it's what's behind that protest. You have flown from England to Washington, D.C. That's a different continent. Simply because you have an unslaked transphobic hunger that you have to vest upon the world and a 22-year-old economics senior. Listen to how absurd that is.
I wasn't aware of the protesters from the UK. But you're right. The amount of money that they must have spent for the plane tickets, for the rental cars, for the hotels, just all of the expenses.
They also had to buy tickets to the event to get in.
Right. My goodness.
It's not anything to do with wanting to be part of a sensible debate. It's not wanting to protect the sport. It's not anything to do with women's rights. It's not anything to do with protecting women. It's just 100% unmitigated, unadulterated, unashamed, and unabashed trans hate. And that's it.
And with that, I think I'm going to bring in the tweets from Dr. Sherry Becker that I have queued up, because this is also one of the things that brought me onto this subject in the first place. I was genuinely surprised at some of the things that she had to say with regards to the history of sports and how much this even has to do with sports in the first place. It starts with this tweet. Dr. Sherry Becker says, I have been hearing more frequently the narrative that women's sport apparently exists as a protected category so that women can win, because on this account, without it, no woman would ever win again. This is not the reason why women's sport exists as a category. It is not because women will never win again. This narrative is profoundly paternalistic and keeps women small. Let's unpack this title. A, women's sport exists as a category because the dominance of men athletes was threatened by women competing. We see this over and over again in the history of sport.
And I'll stop you just there. I'll stop you just there.
Okay.
There is an example of this in the UK.
Okay.
1921, the English Football Association, so that's soccer.
That's example number 3 that she brings up. That's her example number 3.
Football for women for 50 years. Until 1971, football for women in the UK as a competitive sport was banned, was illegal, could not be done, was a no-no. The reason why? There were more people going to watch women's football than men's football.
Women's football, right. Yep. Okay, example 1, figure skating. This one was absolutely shocking to me. 1902, Madge Sayers enters the world's champs and comes in second. No rule preventing her, though no woman had ever entered before. 1903, women banned from world champs. 1905, segregated women's category created. Exhibit 2, skeet shooting. 1992, Barcelona. Zhang Shang wins the gold medal. The event has always been an open event, no gendered categories. 1996, women banned from shooting. 2000, segregated women's category, fewer targets for women. And then here's the one you just brought up. Exhibit 3, football. 1920, women's football thriving in the UK with 53,000 strong crowds. Men had been fighting in World War I. 1921, bans women's football. Men had returned from World War I. 1971, 50 years later, the ban is finally lifted and women's football is still recovering. She says many more examples exist, but the pattern is clear. Where women were included or simply included themselves, it was only when they started threatening men's dominance and entitlement that we were segregated into a separate category. It's why we still see sport and women's sport. Women's inclusion was on the terms of those in power. They didn't want women taking opportunities away from men, so they segregated women. It was never about a benevolent, still sexist aim about supposedly giving women a chance to win. It was about control.
Spot on. Absolutely spot on. And you see this in a number of levels of sport. But what it has done, though, in some sports is it has created these bizarre situations, such as in chess and in motorsport, where the reason that there was a women's category in chess and the reason there was a women's category in motorsports, so there is a specific W series for women and there's a specific women's FIGC championship, because they have done scientific studies in chess that show that when you have double-blind competitors against men, women do just as well. But when you have open competitors against men, women perform less well.
That's interesting.
And when it came to motorsport and the highest levels of motorsport, we had a few women up there. But in Formula One, which is the pinnacle of motorsport, the last woman to compete was in the 1970s. And even then, it wasn't for a full season. We've had a woman come close called Susie Wolff, but she never made it beyond being a Formula One tester. She never competed in an actual race. And yeah, you can also mirror some of these things when it comes to race in motorsport. You've only got one black man in Formula One, Lewis Hamilton. You've only got one black man in NASCAR, Bubba Wallace. And it's amazing how threatened at some points white man has been by women and non-white men. It's fairly incredible that it's not being seen for what it is. And I think that we are finally seeing the vestiges of these white men in power being told on your bike, sod off, you're from a previous era. And it can only be for the best. I'm not saying that all white men are like this, but what I'm saying is that the institutional white men of the past have got to go.
And with that, we'll get back to Matt Walsh.
Trying to keep him out, or her out in that case, would indeed be unfair and wrong. I mean, literally the only argument against Thomas's participation, and it's the only argument we need, is that he is a he. That's the whole argument. There is nothing else. That's all there is to say. He's a he.
So evidently...
There's nothing to say on that. There's nothing to say on that apart from, Matt Walsh, you're a tit.
You know, Matt Walsh obviously will never be convinced that transgender people exist. Never.
Absolutely.
But once the definition becomes more normative, I don't think there is any excuse to keep trans women out of sports or anything else.
Or trans men, for that matter, out of
Or
sports.
trans men, for that matter. You know, that's one of the
Non-binary
things.
people, for that matter.
Yeah, I don't see anyone complaining about trans men in sports, and they are there.
Here's the thing. Trans men in sports do exist. And there was an absurd situation, I think it was in Texas, where there was a wrestling competition where a trans man was required to compete in the women's category, full beard and testosterone the lot.
Yes, yes,
Absolute madness.
yes.
And it's now trotted out as this trans people in sport nonsense, where it was the law in Texas that required that nonsense to take place in the first place. It's absolutely absurd, absolute nonsensical rubbish.
By calling he, she, you undercut yourself, accidentally conceding the very point you're supposed to be arguing against. So the letter is a good start. Definitely. Like, again, I don't mean to detract from the bravery it took to write it, and it does take bravery. But we need to go a lot farther. I mean, this is a good start, a good step. We need to go farther than that. And we need to be arguing against all of this on a fundamental level. So here was another good sign. The swimming finals was also the scene of a confrontation between activist Kelly J. Keene and a man who now identifies as a trans woman after 50 years as a man. Keene was trying to explain to this guy why she is not comfortable with him using the female restroom. And
This is who I was telling you about earlier. Kelly Jane King is also known as Posey Parker, and she is a rampant, unashamed transphobe. Rampant and unashamed. And the fact that Matt Walsh is platforming this individual tells you a lot about Matt Walsh. To platform the obsessive transphobia of Posey Parker, Kelly Jean King, is indicative and eye-opening as to just how echo chamber Matt Walsh's life has become. Someone comes in that Matt Walsh doesn't like, I must find the most extreme example that backs me up. It doesn't matter that you're coming across as a complete moron, Matt Walsh. It doesn't matter that you're now platforming somebody who, in the words of a friend of mine, could you take her back, please? We don't want you. Carly, if you're watching this, we don't want her either.
We have the same problem with Ken Ham. I have tried to get atheist pastor who lives in Australia to take Ken Ham back, and he keeps telling us there's just no take backsies.
What I would say is that if Ken Ham goes back, could we send back some of the failed Australian comedians who have ended up in the UK who've been convicted of sex crimes? Can we send them back to Australia as well, please? If Ken Ham goes as well.
Maybe we should reinstate Australia as a penal colony.
But yes, what you're about to witness is a confrontation between a transphobic bigot and somebody existing.
On the basis of the comfort, hang on the basis of the comfort and dignity of girls and women, I'm asking you, telling you, please do not use women's spaces. It makes them feel uncomfortable.
My girls and the other women I am with are very comfortable with me in the bathroom.
Well, fortunately, I'm not your daughter, and my daughter is also not your daughter.
that's right.
And she
So
would
she
feel,
should stay.
she would feel very uncomfortable. No,
Don't
I,
interrupt
right,
me.
no,
Come on,
you
excuse
interrupted me.
Excuse
You
me.
interrupted
I'm not
me.
here for
Goodness
So
gracious.
there we go. There we go. There you go. The blonde one is the British bigot that we don't want. That's the blonde one. We don't like her. She is an obsessive transphobe. She is responsible for some of the most nonsensical arguments that have ever come out. Not only is she transphobic, but she has a lot of other phobias and isms that she likes to jump on about that will detract from this stream if I was to go into them. But that individual is basically saying, my rights trump your rights.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And no
And
one can go
who
in
the
the
bloody
bathroom
hell
unless
is
I
she?
want them.
And who the
Right.
bloody hell is she to be the toilet police?
Mm-hmm. And there are plenty of cis women who have been told not to use the women's toilet because they don't look sufficiently feminine.
Who gave her a warrant card to be a police officer outside a toilet?
Mm-hmm.
Does she hand me a mint at the same time, or ask me to freshen up like the gentlemen in the hotels used to do? Would she like that to come back and wash you at it? Could you please drop your trousers before you come in? Can I see your birth certificate? Oh wait, you've changed your birth certificate. You've had SRS code. Could you please take this chromosome test whilst you're at it? Could I get your mother in here to confirm? Can I see your birth records? It's absolutely.
Yep.
Do you mind?
Right.
I would ask you to please call off your dog.
I beg your pardon. I'm asking you as a
Okay, she got a good one in there. that was a decent
What does your
comeback.
daughter think of you?
Yeah, very good question.
I'm asking you as a mother, do not use female spaces.
And I'm very uncomfortable.
It makes women and girls
As a
feel
mother-
very
as a
uncomfortable.
mother,
You
I
are
am-
not, how dare you?
As
You
a
are
mother,
not a
I
mother.
am very. You're not
a
You
mother.
never birthed your children. You are not a mother, dog.
Right, I'm
Good job
just-
of mom.
Oh, goodness gracious.
There it is. There it is. The proof that this is nothing to do with trans people. This is the proof that they are biological essentialists. If you have had children through a surrogate, you are not a mother. If you have used IVF and a surrogate, you are not a mother. And that woman just said what this whole movement is about. It is nothing to do with trans people. It is about biological essentialism and them trying to control the lives of other people because they are bigots.
Well, you missed adoption.
Absolutely.
Women who adopt are not, do not give biological.
Absolutely.
Mhm. I had somebody on
And
Twitter.
Here's another thing.
Go ahead.
If you are in a same-sex couple and you both have the ability to birth children, but only one of you does, the other person isn't a mother according to that idiot.
I had someone on Twitter recently accuse me of being male, and I asked him if that means that I need to give back the 4 babies that I gave birth to.
What you should have said was, thank you for recognizing that trans men give birth.
Ah.
You hear this guy say, as a mother, this is a 50-year-old dude who, after 50 years as a dude, decided to put on a wig and call himself a woman. I mean, that's it. One day he wakes up, puts a wig on. I'm a woman. I'm a mother.
One thing I have to wonder, I have no idea who this woman is in this video. And I don't know that she's well known or if she is or not. Why does Matt think that this woman has just suddenly decided to transition?
Because Matt Walsh believes in nonsense theories such as rapid onset gender dysphoria and that it's all feelings and artsy-fartsy woo-woo, where in fact, Matt Walsh, you're choosing to be a bigot and you're the one engaging in artsy-fartsy woo-woo. I don't choose to be trans. You choose to be a transphobe.
Well, I'm just wondering if she's been trans, for 40 years, 50 years, for all we know.
I do not know this individual's medical history. I do not know this individual's personal circumstances. And why is Matt Walsh claiming that they do?
Exactly. Exactly. Mm-hmm.
All of the most difficult aspects of motherhood, he now wants to claim the title for himself. Except he ran into at least one woman who won't go along with it, doesn't want the women's restroom to turn into a masquerade ball or a costume party for this guy's sake. What comes across most of all in the conversation between the two is, as I pointed to many times, the overwhelming, suffocating narcissism of the trans person in this exchange.
Overwhelming, suffocating narcissism. Overwhelming, suffocating. Look, Matt. Can I call you Matt? I'm going to call you Matt because that's the name that you've given me, and it's only respectful that I choose the name that you've given me. You have demonstrated nothing but self-absorption, narcissism, and bigotry with every syllable that has come out of your beaded mouth. You should take one look in the mirror and go, oh, wait. I'm a narcissistic, self-absorbed, egomaniacal lunatic that is a bigot and a transphobe. Yeah, I know I've got an ego, and I lean into my ego. And for those of you that know me, that know that I've got an ego, you know that I lean into it. And I know that I'm narcissistic, and I know that I lean into it. But I will not have rank hypocrisy go unchallenged. And Matt, if that really is your name, you are a rank hypocrite.
He simply doesn't care how anyone else feels and, what anyone else wants.
Oh my goodness. There you go.
And I say this to you, Matt. Nobody gives a shit what you think or what you care about.
Well, Matt obviously also doesn't care how anyone else feels either. And he even said so straight out in another one of his videos.
Does Matt Walsh believe that mental health diagnoses are real? Does Matt Walsh believe generalized anxiety disorder is a genuine condition? Depression is a genuine condition? Schizophrenia, for example. Does Matt Walsh believe schizophrenia is real? Does Matt Walsh believe that dissociative identity disorder is real? What else can we do? Does Matt Walsh believe that hallucinations are real? Synesthesia. Does Matt Walsh believe in synesthesia?
He clearly does not believe in PTSD. He recently had a tweet up where he was mocking, I can't remember her name, the tennis star, for getting upset at being heckled at the, was it the London Championships? Was it Wimbledon? I don't remember.
Emma Raducanu.
Yes.
The Wimbledon Championships, where she had to retire through injury. And you know what the biggest FU was that she went and did? She went and won the US Open as a qualifier. So Matt Walsh, you can stick that up your backside.
He was saying that, she has no right to be upset over being heckled. And he didn't get that it was a PTSD response.
And here's something that I'm going to say to Matt Walsh. A burglar breaks into your house. You now have no right to be upset that a burglar has broken into your house and gone through your private stuff, because you're not entitled to feelings. Because you say that no one else is entitled to feelings or emotions or reactions. Oh, wait. This whole video is me emotionally reacting to you, emotionally reacting to a 22-year-old economics major who neither one of us have ever met in our lives and are highly unlikely to ever meet in our lives, and shouldn't even know the name of, and shouldn't even know their existence of, unless we are swimming nuts.
He takes whatever he wants for himself without any concern for anybody around him. He claims the bathrooms of women, he claims their very identities, tries to make it all his own. Somewhat paradoxically, though, while he covets womanhood, he also very clearly has incredible contempt for the women themselves.
Says a man who is exhibiting contempt for trans people and women in general.
And he, along with all the other gender ideologues, have been running roughshod over the culture for years, taking whatever they want with no resistance. That finally seems to be changing, slightly. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not declaring victory. we're a very long way off from anything that can be considered a cultural victory on this front or any other front. Because victory, if it comes, is years down the line. Generations away, probably. It took generations to lose the culture. We'll take generations to get it back. But recently, we have seen some movement in the right direction. We're seeing some of that here.
When he says the right direction, I mean politically right, not
Yes.
correct.
That's exactly what I was thinking too. Yep, there's no question that the right is trying desperately to cling to an outdated culture.
Baby steps towards sanity and moral decency. Now, these advances could easily stall.
Moral decency. Moral decency. I'll give you moral decency. Moral decency at one point said that you could tell black people that they were the same but different. That they were separate but equal. That was moral decency.
Well, worse yet, go back another 100 years, and moral decency allowed you to own other people and enslave them.
Moral decency at one point in time said that it was fine to put on display in a zoo an African tribesman. That was moral decency at one point, Matt Walsh. Are you really going to try and defend moral decency of the past? Moral decency of the past at one point said that it was fine to own your dog, your house, and your wife. That's morally decent of you, isn't it, Matt Walsh? Moral decency also said that if you wanted to force your wife to have sex with you and she said no, you could just do it anyway.
Succeed in, say, getting men out of women's sports and then decide that that's good enough, call ourselves the winner, go back to ignoring the issue. I can see that happening.
Actually, he does have a point there. We can't just ignore trans people. We need to not only recognize them in sports, but everywhere where they are. So, yes, he's right. This is not limited to sport.
Tennessee, we're looking at you. You, Tennessee, are the last holdout state that does not allow trans people to change their birth certificates. In Tennessee, we're looking at you. But if you happen to be born in the home of country music and the home of Elvis, like
maybe Dolly Parton can help us with that. She can do tremendous things.
Yes, she can.
If we all, go with the line that some conservatives have adopted, claiming that we have no problem with the left's gender theories in general, we just care about fairness in sports or privacy in the bathroom or whatever, as if that's the fundamental issue, which it isn't. What we have to remain firm on is that we have a problem with the very concept, the guy there in the wig, the very concept that he could be a woman because he says he is. That is what we are taking issue with.
Whoa. Gender ideologues, problem with gender theory. You know what? The only gender ideologues out there are people like Matt Walsh, people like Kelly Jean King. They're the gender ideologues. They're the gender obsessives. Not me. I'm just living my life.
Right.
It's just my life. Matt, if that really is your name, because it's the only name you've given me. So I'm going to question your identity because you're questioning my identity. So the only people whose gender ideology I hate and I question is that on the right, the far right, and the bigoted right. I question their gender ideology because it is rooted in idiocy.
And ignorance.
We're arguing against. That's what we're fighting. It's not just this or that particular thing that guy wants to do, but it's the very claim that he is making about himself.
Whoa. Very claim that individual is making about themselves? Who the hell are you to say what you just said with a straight face? Who the bloody hell made you the arbiter of what someone else is allowed to say about themselves? Who the bloody hell made you an arbiter? What, next? Oh, hello, you've got married, Miss Jones, and you're now not taking the name of Mr. Smith. Oh, I've decided, though, that I'm going to call you Mrs. Smith. But I've decided to retain the name Jones. Oh, but, you know, I think that because you're married, you therefore must be called Mrs. Smith. Doesn't matter what you say, I'm going to say that my opinions trump your opinions. That's what it comes down to. That's what it exactly is. Matt Walsh is saying that he would have no problem, as a logical extension to what he has just said, to intentionally forcing patriarchal conventions onto women. Because, you know, Matt Walsh says so. Matt Walsh says it's fine. Matt Walsh is, you know, the arbiter of the law.
There are still a lot of people on the right who are very cautious about that, very afraid. And so you see this even now. You see plenty of people, you know, even conservatives who for the first time are really speaking out about some of this stuff. They're saying, oh, I don't have any problem with transgenderism. It's just women's sports that I care about.
In other words,
bingo word. Bingo. Transgenderism.
In other words, if you don't agree with me completely, you haven't reached the correct ideology yet.
No, we adopt that. We make that our line. That's a mistake. And we lose.
I think he's lost already.
Sorry.
Yeah. Good point. What is it that they want to win?
Yeah, why are you trying
We'll only become more desperate, more enraged, try to push even further. As we're seeing down in Florida, they will double down and triple down, then double down on their triple down. Again, as they've done in Florida.
Matt Walsh, I'm going to say this to you. Gay! Gay! Hey, Matt. Gay! Matt Walsh, got something for you. Gay!
The battle only gets more vicious from here. But I think we're finally moving ever so slightly in the right direction.
Okay, and that's at that point he goes into some different stories.
So in conclusion, if you don't agree with every single word that Matt Walsh says, you're not Matt Walsh pure. You haven't passed Matt Walsh's purity test, so therefore you are part of the problem. Agree with Matt Walsh 100%? Chef's kiss. Agree 99%? You're part of the problem, and that's the reason we're going to lose.
Matt Walsh, loser extraordinaire.
Le who, sir?
And with that, thank you very much, Phoebe, for joining me, and thank you for your time and your wonderful reactions. It has been an absolute delight to have you.
It's an absolute pleasure.
Live your life.
Do you know what is worse than the bullies who misgender trans youth, ostracizing them and eventually leading to their deaths? People like Matt Walsh that encourage the bullies to misgender trans youth, ostracizing them and eventually leading to their deaths. Shut up, Matt Walsh, so that the rest of us who aren't bigoted transphobes can just get on with life. Live your life.
On your bike, sod off, you're from a previous era. Gay!